Well, happy July, everyone. Thanks for joining us once again for our July monthly buzz. It's always a blast to get to spend some time with all of you talking about what you need to be doing in your bees this month to keep them strong, healthy, and happy. If we haven't met before, my name is Blake, and I am a commercial beekeeper. I'm one of the owners of the Bee Supply, and went from two hives in my backyard to over 30,000 beehives over the course of several years. And I love doing these webinars because I get to take all the practical information that I've learned along the way and distill it down to what you need to be doing with your bees in your own backyard to keep them healthy and happy. So, we're going to cover a lot of ground today. July is a very busy month when it comes to beekeeping, and we have a lot of information to share with you in the next 30 to 40 minutes. And this is how I feel every July. I mean, there is so much to do. Some areas are harvesting honey. Some areas are just getting ready for the honey crop. Some areas are already in a dearth period. So we've got a lot to do in the month of July, and we're just going to take it one bite at a time and we'll get through it together. As a quick reminder, if you do live near one of our stores in Texas, we have summer bees available, June through August. We sell single story hives. So if you missed the bee train in the spring and didn't get bees and you want bees, then there is still a chance to get them. So you don't have to live in Texas. You're welcome to drive from wherever, and we would love to get you some bees this year in the month of June, July, or August. We've also got the best supplements. These are some supplements that I'll talk a little bit about later tonight, but Complete is a product that I use in the summer along with Apis Biologics, or rocket fuel as some people call it. These are fantastic supplements that really help bees get through a dearth period in the summer months. That's really what I like them for. If you need your hive to grow, if your brood looks unhealthy, if you're in a drought or dearth period, then Complete is a great product to use. You can drench the bees with it, or you can put it in their feed. Apis Biologics is really trying to maintain the strength of a hive through a dearth or drought period. You mix it with syrup, and it kind of supplements a poor pollen or nectar flow. So when there's not a great flow, Apis Biologics essentially is putting the nutrients found in honey and pollen into sugar syrup. So it's both great products, both wonderful to use after you harvest your honey and you're getting your bees through summer or preparing them for winter. We've also got global pollen patties, and you don't need them quite yet. We'll talk about it in a minute, but these are great once you harvest your honey and you're getting your bees through the summer, getting them prepped for winter. These are phenomenal pollen patties. So I'll talk more about those later. The last product I want to highlight before we get into practical information is the super bag. I love this thing. So I think we invented it. Someone else might sell a version of it, but we came up with this idea a couple of years ago of, hey, we need like this zippable, sealable bag that you can just drop your honey supers in after you harvest honey and put your wax moth crystals in to keep them safe from wax moths. Or what a lot of our customers do is they put the honey super after they've harvested the honey out of it into the freezer to make sure all wax moth larvae or eggs are killed. And then they'll seal it up in the super bag and they won't have to put any sort of wax moth crystals or treatment in it because it stays sealed up in this bag. If you put it in a trash bag, it often doesn't seal as well. And so the other quick thing I love about these is you actually set this bag on the ground and then you can stack up the supers and you pull the bag up around it and zip it on the top. And it's a really easy way to get that bag around a stack of supers. So I love the super bag. It's great for storing those supers after you harvest the honey out of them. Sherry, what do we have going on with our July topics?
Hey, how are you? Good to see you, Blake. I I'm not believing that summer is here. Actually, looking at the calendar, it's a little bit hot already, and the thought of it being called summer makes me a little bit nervous because I think that it's going to be a hot one, y'all. All right, so but we got some good topics, and we've got 5 weeks in July. Every once in a while, a month throws us an extra week. It means an extra week's worth of work for me, but I don't mind because I'm doing it for you. So these are our topics, and just like last month, I've got them little circles. You can search these in all three of those places. They will be posted in the very first of the month. I think all of those are set to go out on the end of June, June 30th. So when you see this, they will already be up. Week one, keeping your hive healthy, navigating Varroa control and changing times. Week two, that would be me, Sherry's tips, your post-harvest hive to-do list, and I'm going to talk more about that in a second. Week three, summer survival guide for strong fall hives. Super important article I want you to read. Week four, we're going to be sending to the email recipients understanding a mean hive and what to do about that. I'm sure none of you have had to deal with that, right? Week five, upper ventilation, helping bees beat the heat. I should put our little beekeeper selves on there sweating like that as well, because it's going to be a hot one. But just a reminder, if you're not signed up to get these in your email, all of those of you watching this on YouTube, if you don't get our emails, go to the TBS monthly articles. I've got it circled there in the middle, and be in the know. Put your email in there, and we're going to send one of these articles out each week. It's going to be awesome. Comes right to your email. And we also send some other helpful stuff with it. You'll love it. All right, Blake, with that slide. All right, so July article focus, I'm going to talk about my tips. And this is just personal stuff that is on my to-do list that I thought I would share with you in a little mini article. So I'm going to go over a few things with you. Number one, and I know Blake's going to be talking about a lot of this, but I'm just going to kind of hit the high notes. Is number one is summer and early fall are your critical, probably most critical time of year. And that's when I'm thinking as a beekeeper that my bees are really preparing for winter. And all of the things that we do to help them out are going to make such a difference in how they overwinter. And I know that sounds so crazy coming in a 90 plus degree day, but it's the truth. Our bees already know it. We've got to get on their page. And number two, Varroa must be under control. I know Blake's going to talk to you about that. And feeding both carbs and protein. And he's going to talk about summer feeding, so I won't get off into that. But in the article, I touch on it a little bit. Queen health, super big deal because, we'll only have queens offered, in other words, an opportunity to requeen through about September or end of August, I think. So you want to really assess that queen and make sure she's in for the long haul because she's got to go through fall, through winter, and then be good enough to come out in the spring as a good productive queen. So really go in, read this quick article and assess that queen health and make sure you don't need to do something about that. Small hive beetles, and I'm going to touch just briefly on that. Um, this is the time of year in the areas where we're getting a lot of rain. I need to do two arms with that. We've had a lot of rain. We've still managed to have a really good nectar flow, but this has been a very wet early summer for us. Small hive beetles are almost our middle name here. Do not let them get out of control. Keep ahead. We are at that place where if we've got a double brood box, we're putting two beetle traps, and I love our metal ones, the ones they're cleanable. Is that a word? Reusable, cleanable because I clean them. You just slide the top off. You can clean it out. It's really easy to clean out. Pour oil back in it, close it back up. But we put them usually in hive slots like 4 and 7. So just outside the brood nest, but we're putting two in the bottom and two in the top. I'm not letting small hive beetles take over my hive. Not going to do it. But the wetter you are, the more you're going to have issues with them. So keep that in mind. The last thing I want to talk about is storing honey supers. And Blake, matter of fact, I love that super bag. Love it, love it, love it. Did I say I love it? It is an ideal product for storing supers. I mean, just kind of go over a couple of things with you. I was a Paramoth fan. We did Paramoth for years and years and years, and you may still do that. It's for a fumigant, for lack of a better word. It's kind of, but not like the moth crystals like we hear about our grandmothers using, in their little storage to keep moths off their fur coats back when that was a thing. It's not anymore. But I can't say the word, but if you can't pronounce it, that means it's the right one. Moth crystals. And it works great, but you do have to continue to install them. You stack your supers up and then you install that moth crystals we usually do it every 2 or 3 supers. But you have to kind of keep replenishing that. But the product that I like the best is called Sertan. Certan. Sertan is let me read it real quick. It's a environmentally friendly product, and it's got a bacillus and another word I can't pronounce. I'll just leave it at that. Bacillus T, and it leaves no residue on the wax or the honey. And you spray it tip, and I don't know if Blake's going to talk about this or not, but when you extract your supers that evening at dusk, go put them back on the hive, let the bees dry them out, clean them out overnight, and then the next day or two, you can wait a couple of days, take those off because they'll have them all nice and dry for you. Spray it. It's a 1 to 19 ratio. I have that memorized because I've done it so many times. 1 to 19 ratio. 1 ounce of the Sertan to 19 parts water, and you spray it, let it dry, and then you put them back in the hive box and put them in a super bag. Doing it. We are doing that, and it works beautifully. That zipper works so nice. But do that, and you won't have that smell. You won't have to take your supers out. And I'm not trying to tell people that like the paramoth, don't use it because we did it for years. But the Sertan, you don't have to air them. It's just, it has no odor. It has no residual that's left. You do it one and done. I'm a fan, so I had to share that with you. So the takeaway on this article is comb is gold. Treat it as such, because if you leave it out, wax moths and roaches and things, don't ask me how I know that. We have a barn. Don't ask me how I know. You've got to do either Sertan or paramoth. And summer's hard on bees. Be diligent with all those other things. So anyway, I know I said that all fast, but I hope you got something out of it. Please read the article. Thanks, Blake. That's all I got.
Of course. Thank you, Chari. That was fantastic, as always. All right, so let's jump out in the bee yard. Let's see what the bees are up to as we get into the hot summer months, and then we'll jump right back into the classroom.
Now this is a hive that we had bottom supered last month with foundation. So we put a medium box of foundation on the bottom, and let's see what they've done with it. So they've drawn some of it out. They've drawn, as you can see, they've drawn some of these frames out, but they didn't draw them all out. We did some checkerboarding of previously drawn frames, and those they pretty much filled with honey. But I am starting to see, look at this frame in the bottom. So that whole middle area has been completely cleared out of honey. So they're starting to eat the honey that's left on the hive. You know, when you see these supers and they've got drawn comb, but the bees have cleared all the honey out of that drawn comb, it's a good sign that the honey flow is completely over and the bees are actually starting to consume this honey. So you can see it on this frame too. You've got honey around the edge, but all the honey's cleared out in the middle. So I would expect to see that. I mean, in my opinion, in most areas of the South, the honey flow ended, 2 to 3 weeks ago. And so I'm expecting to see the bees now eat that honey rather than bring in a surplus. So we're going to get these hives extracted quickly before they eat all the honey, and then we'll probably need to do some feeding afterwards to replenish their stores. I want to make sure the second box on these hives has at least 30 pounds of stored honey or syrup in it. So after we harvest this honey, if there's not 20 or 30 pounds left in the bottom brood box, we're going to quickly start feeding. So let's see what's going on down in the bottom brood box. What's going on with the bee population. Let me adjust this for you here a little bit. So we've got a pretty good bee population, but I will say, I never try to judge the bee population in the middle of a hot day. There's just too many bees outside the hive where it's cooler to accurately judge the bee population. If I'm trying to get a good feel for the adult bee population in a hive, I'm going to be looking early in the morning or very, very late in the day. That's when you're going to have most of the bees inside the hive. So look at that. This is one of our Texas 5000, I believe, queens. Beautiful, beautiful frames of brood. They've still got some pollen, but not a tremendous amount. That's something I'm really looking for this year, is how much pollen do these hives have in them? because if I'm not seeing more than a cumulative half frame of pollen, then I'm going to be feeding some pollen patties.
So one of the things I really start watching carefully as we enter into our long hot summers is the amount of pollen stores in my hive. Because if those pollen stores start dipping too low, then I really want to supplement their pollen source. So I want to give them a pollen patty to make sure my bees don't run out of protein. Because as you guys know, the honey is the carbs in a bee's diet, the pollen is the protein in a bee's diet, and if they don't have both, they can't raise brood, and they'll start cannibalizing baby brood, and the whole hive in general will become much more unhealthy as those worker bees are not able to feed the developing larvae the proper diet. And that's so important in the summertime, because in the summertime they're raising the baby bees that are going to try to survive the winter. And if they don't have the right nutrition to feed those developing larvae over the summer, then you're not going to have a hive that can successfully overwinter. So the first thing I'm looking at is I'm trying to see, do I have pollen reserves inside this hive? Now, you guys won't be able to see in the video. There's our queen, by the way. You guys won't be able to see in the video, but I see pollen in here, but I can literally count the number of cells, so there's not many, okay? So I'm gonna set this frame aside gently, because I know my queen's on it. And I'm especially gonna look at these outside frames bordering the brood nest, because that's often where pollen stores are. And so in here, I see a little bit of stored pollen down here, but very, very little. What I'm looking for is a big, thick band of pollen around the brood nest, around the brood. Or I'm looking for a half of a frame covered in pollen. Now this is all just capped brood. I see no pollen reserves in here. Set that frame aside, and I'm gonna keep looking. But I'm really looking for some significant stores of pollen, either a half a frame that's completely packed with pollen, or at least some healthy bands of pollen around the brood. And again, I'm not really seeing that. I'm seeing a scattering of cells that have pollen in them here and there. So you can see kind of down in here, I've got a little bit of pollen. Now this is capped brood over here, but I've got some pollen down in here. And you can always tell the difference by just taking your hive tool, kind of digging in a little bit. You can see that's not a baby bee, that's pollen. So you can always dig in a little bit to see what's what. But so yeah, I'm not really just seeing those good healthy bands of pollen. I'm not really seeing half a frame of pollen anywhere. So it's real simple at this point. This time of year, I really recommend using a pollen patty, not dry pollen. That only typically works in the fall. So I'm gonna recommend a pollen patty. So I just give the hive some smoke. This is our 1 pound pollen patty. You want them to be very soft, and so you can see this one's very pliable. It's very soft, kind of like peanut butter. That's the texture we're going for. If it's hard, bees won't touch it. So it needs to be very soft. You leave the paper on. It helps keep the patty soft as the bees are eating it and keep it from drying out. And you're just going to give the hive some smoke, and you want to place it directly on the top bars right in the middle of the hive, just like that, okay? Now, you don't want to give them more than they can eat in about a week. And so what you're going to want to do is come back in about a week and make sure the vast majority of this patty is eaten. If it's not, then you can pull out the excess, throw it in the freezer for a couple days, and then put it back on, because what is going to happen is small hive beetles love these pollen patties. So you want to, if it's on there more than a week, then the small hive beetles can lay eggs, those larvae can hatch, and they can start making a mess in the hive. So you want to leave it on for about a week, take off whatever they haven't eaten, throw it in the freezer for a couple days, you can put it back on. Hey everybody, so one thing I'm a big proponent of is keeping your bees busy over the summer. You know, bees that don't have anything to do, that just sit around in the heat all summer long, kind of like teenagers, aren't very productive. So one thing I love to do is give them something to do over the summer months so they can stay busy. And if they're busy and if they're working, they're going to be healthier overall. So one thing you can do over the summer is get your bees to draw out additional foundation for next year. And I want to show you really quickly how to do that. It's really simple. And the key is that you feed that hive about 1/4 gallon or so of syrup per week in order to get them to draw out that comb. I call it trickle feeding.
And so after you've already harvested your honey, you can add a deep or medium box of foundation to hives in order to get them to draw it out over the summer months when they're not really doing anything else. So right here we've got a hive that is a deep and a medium. It could be 2 deeps, it could just be 1 deep, and we're gonna check it out and see about adding a box to it to keep the bees busy. Now if it were just a single without the second box, we could just add it directly on top. So this particular hive has a medium box. Here's our beetle trap that we're going to remove. So this hive has a medium box that's pretty much full of honey. They haven't capped everything yet, but it's pretty much full. Now it doesn't have any brood in it. It would be fine if it did have brood, but it doesn't have any brood in it. So the queen has stayed down below. So what I'm going to do, and I would do the same if it were deep. Now if it had brood in it, I would leave it and I would just take my new box of foundation, put it directly on top, and then I would give them about 1/4 gallon of food per week through the summer, and they would slowly move up and draw out that second peak. Now, since my box doesn't have any brood in it, then I'm going to pull it off, and you can see our pollen patty there. The bees are eating, which is great to do in the summertime. I'm going to put my deep box of foundation directly on top of the brood nest. I'm going to put this medium, where they've already stored some syrup that we've been feeding them after harvest, back up on top, and then put everything back together. Now what this is going to do is, since there's a box that already has a bunch of honey in it up here, and now this box is sitting directly on top of our brood nest, it's going to encourage them to move up and draw out this box even faster. Sometimes bees don't always like to move up to a brand new box of foundation, but if there's a full box above it, they'll move up right away.
Welcome back into the classroom. As we jump into other topics, we have some questions that you guys have asked over the past month, and we always want to do some element of Q&A. And so, Chari, what do the people want to know? What are the
I've
people?
been gathering. Boy, I tell you, you could write a book on just questions that get sent for Blake. Did you know that?
Well, funny thing, that might
Funny,
be.
funny that we say that.
Yeah.
One day it'll happen. One day, one day. So there's, I've got 5. I'm trying to keep it down to 5, and then you can do them as short or as long as you want. But most of them are geared around honey extraction. Go figure, right? The first one was if not all the frames are ready and the nectar flow is nearly over, in other words, they're not cured, not capped, what should I do with the ones that aren't capped? Should I leave them on and hope that the bees will finish capping them, even though the nectar flow is over?
Such a common question, and it's a really great question. I mean, I actually don't rely on capped frames, capped cells to tell me if the honey is ready or not, because it's really common towards the end of the honey flow that the bees run out of energy, run out of nectar, run out of wax, to really cap everything. And so they often won't cap everything. And so what I do is I hold that frame, I do the shake test, and I've mentioned it before in webinars. And if you go back to probably, well, I think I have a short video on it in a minute. But if you hold the frame horizontally over the top of the hive and shake it, if no nectar rains out, it's cured. It's ready to go. So if you can't shake it, and I'm not talking about a drop or two, I'm talking like if it rains out, then it's not ready. But if you're holding it horizontally over and giving it some vigorous shakes, and you're getting a couple drops out, but that's it, it's ready, even if it's not capped.
Well, and that just prevents you from having to worry about it. I'm gonna jump down to another question that I had on actually number 3. Can I leave that super on? Somebody said, can I leave that honey super on over summer if I don't want to take that honey?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't want to harvest the honey, you can absolutely leave it. I mean, the bees will use some of it over the winter, and you'll probably have some left late winter that you'll have to do something with. But sure, absolutely, you don't have to take the honey off of the hive if you don't plan to harvest the honey. Perfectly fine to sit there all summer and winter.
Well, and it also is like a vent. It's like
Yeah,
that empty box that you talk about putting on to
right.
cool.
So heat
Vanilla
barrier
hives.
there. Yeah, yeah, yep.
Gives them some airspace. Yeah,
Mhm.
I like that. We do that too. Another question. I had to pull my honey supers after days of rain. Know what that's like?
Yeah.
And now I find out that my moisture content is over 21%. Been there, done that too. What is the fastest way to dry out almost 500 pounds of honey in those white buckets y'all sell?
Oh,
Do I have to take it out of those buckets? Ugh.
yeah. Well, I feel their pain. I once had so quick story time, probably 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I had about 80 barrels, 80 55-gallon barrels of honey that was about 21% moisture. Didn't realize it until we got it into the barrel. And so I had like 80 barrels of honey that I had to do something with or it was going to ferment. So exact same situation. And what I did, which worked surprisingly well, is the same thing that you can do. I just had to do it with, 80 barrels. What I did is I brought all those 80 barrels into our bottling room, so the room where we bottle honey. I took all the lids off, and then I turned the air conditioning down to about 60, well, as low as it would go, which is about 60 degrees. And then every day I would go in there and I would stir that barrel. And it only took, 7 to 10 days, surprisingly fast, before that really cold air sucked enough moisture out of those barrels that I got it down to about 18 to 19% moisture, which is where you want honey to be. So on a small scale, you can do exactly that. Get all those buckets into a room. Uh, maybe get a window unit into a small room and crank that AC down to about 60 degrees and open those buckets, stir it once a day, and that cold should suck the moisture out of that honey. Heat works too. Heat doesn't work quite as well. You can put it in a refrigerator, an old refrigerator with a heat lamp bulb in it, and get it up to about 120 degrees. The side benefit of heat is it will kill the yeast that causes fermentation. So that's a plus. But it'll take a little longer with the heat to pull that moisture out than it will at cold. But that's my best tip for you. So heat or cold will suck it out. Cold will do it a little better.
Well, I have, and you've seen pictures of it. We have a, big giant igloo cooler.
Mhm.
And we tend to, because we end up with so many buckets that as it cools, we keep two in there just to keep them from crystallizing to feed our bottling tank, right? Well, it works, but like you said, heat doesn't work as well because you got the humidity. So the humidity, it's just almost like a vicious cycle. You're just stirring that humidity back in
Right.
there. So we did learn that if we cracked the lid of the igloo and it let so it was like a
Yeah.
displacement, that does
Yeah.
work. The other thing we've done in the room, and anybody that stayed with us in our guest room, that bed, yes, was covered in buckets, laying boards across, covered the room and put a dehumidifier in there
Yes.
and pulling out. I mean, we would have to dump a gallon of water a day because it's not just pulling it out of the bucket, it's pulling out of our air that there's just a little bit of air in our water around here. So, but that's just my small scale
Yeah.
take on it. But you're right. Air conditioner, if you got a window unit, the fastest way, the fastest way. I don't have one of those, but I could get one.
But
Uh,
a dehumidifier in a small room, you can rent
works
one.
well.
You can even rent a little dehumidifier. So yeah, that's
Oh, I didn't think about it. You could rent
yeah,
one.
like Home Depot, Lowe's, you can rent even a dehumidifier big one, and that'll do it pretty quickly too.
We wore one out. Smooth wore one out.
Yeah.
That's how much we used it. Well, we tend to have wet honey. So next, this one to me broke my heart, but we know what this is like. Anybody watching the news has seen that the hill country has had a little bit of rain. They were drought, and then now they got inundated. So this person said, we live in the hill country, and a few of our hives got caught in the flood waters the other day, but only about halfway up the bottom box and only for a short time because that water does dissipate pretty quickly. Do I need to change out the frames? What am I supposed to do? Anything I need to do?
It's always heartbreaking when that happens, and I've had it happen many times. I think I have a picture coming up in a little bit that shows some flooded hives.
Mm.
Um, so it's good news that it only went halfway up the bottom box. I would say just check them. Give them a week. And if it's a really strong, healthy hive, they're going to pull out the brood that died, they're going to pull out the pollen, clean it up, and they'll be just fine. If it's a mediocre hive, what you really want to watch out for is small hive beetles and small hive beetle larvae. With all that wet honey and wet brood and wet pollen, it's perfect for small hive beetles. So again, a good, strong, healthy hive, they'll be in there, they'll clean it up, they'll get rid of it. But I would check every couple of days and make sure the small hive beetles aren't getting a really strong foothold. If they are, if you start seeing, dozens and dozens of small hive beetle larvae in the frames, you probably are going to need to, get rid of that whole bottom box and then, let them exist in the upper box and maybe put a new box on top, to give them some new space.
Yeah, and most everybody runs screen bottom boards. If you don't, that might would be a good opportunity to put one.
Yeah, agreed.
Just so that it can get an airflow. And one of Blake's tricks, as a matter of fact, there's a video out for July of putting a stick up under the lid and giving it some airflow just so it can dry out because bees are pretty resilient when it comes to cleaning up mess.
Right.
They've sure got to have things on their side. If it's
Right.
closed up, then it's hard. Yeah, that's good information there. All right, the last question. Sad day for this person too. I found some queen cells in my hive, but the queen's still laying and there's plenty of room. What should I do?
Yeah, I mean, typically, when you find queen cells in the hive and an existing queen, they're either preparing to swarm or they're preparing to replace that old queen. If you've got plenty of room in the hive, that's probably not a swarm. They're probably getting ready to supersede that old queen. Something's wrong with her, and maybe they know it, even if you're not seeing it yet. The bees know something's wrong. Now, I would make sure they're not going to swarm. I would say if your boxes are 80% full of bees or 80% full of honey, then they could be preparing to swarm. But if you're less than that, then they're probably getting ready to supersede that old queen. You can try to kill the queen, wipe out the old queen cells, order a new queen to replace her. By the time you do all of that, some of those queen cells are probably going to be getting ready to hatch. So usually what I do if they're superseding the queen is I just give them a few frames of cat brood from another strong hive if you have it, and let them go ahead and finish raising their own queen and let nature take its course.
Yeah.
Really, what you may just have to do is boost them up with, one or two frames of brood now, and then in a couple weeks, give them another few frames of brood or a frame of brood to keep that hive strong and healthy as they're raising their own new queen.
Mhm. And then you can always replace her if she turns out to not be a good one.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's easy. All right. Well, you did great. Perfect answers.
Wonderful. Good to hear.
All right.
Thank
So
you,
back
Chari.
to you.
All right, great. All right, well, let's jump back into the classroom and chat about what we need to be doing in our bees. And here's that picture I referenced a second ago that July can be all over the place. You can go from extreme drought, which is the picture on the left, to extreme flooding, which is the picture on the right, and everywhere in between. The big thing to keep in mind for July is that this is the month where we do winter preparation. So we are preparing for winter in the month of July. I know it's hard to believe when it's 100 degrees outside, but July is when we start thinking about what do our bees need to properly prepare for winter. This is where my bees are right now. Most of them are in the Midwest where there's beautiful clover, and this is canola that's blooming right here. It's just gorgeous. It's 75 degrees, 80 degrees, sunny. But that's not the case for a lot of the country, especially if you live in the southern US. We don't have a lot of blooms. The blooms are all dying and it's getting hot. This is the picture or the video I mentioned. Oops, let's see if I can get it to play. Well, it's not going to play. This was the shake test I was going to show you guys of shaking nectar out above frames. But oh well, I'll post that later somewhere. This is the drought map. Oops, this is the drought map, and you can see this is for the past handful of years. So the last couple years haven't been terrible for most regions. Last year, if you look at that July 2024, not bad. This year, a lot of the US looks pretty decent drought-wise. It's certainly been worse, especially if you go back into 2022 or the central US in 2023. Our friends in Nevada and New Mexico and Arizona aren't doing so hot right now, but there's not a lot of beekeeping in those states either. But overall, the drought is not bad in most regions. Here's kind of what I'm seeing nationwide. The honey flows are wrapping up or are done for most of the South. They're well underway or slowing for much of the northern half of the U.S. So far, most regions are avoiding extreme dearths. We've had a lot of rain in most regions and average temperatures. And so right now, it doesn't look like we're going to have a terrible, terrible dearth period, which is really good. Now, we're still going to have a dearth, but hopefully it's not as severe as it's been in some previous years. So here's what I'm thinking of when I think of summer care and what I need to be doing for my bees. I'm really trying to maintain a 20 to 30 pound surplus of honey in my second brood box. And I'm doing that by feeding 1/4 to 1/2 a gallon of syrup per week until you've got 20 to 30 pounds stored in the second brood box. Just as a reminder, 30 pounds is one medium box, 90% full of honey, or one deep box, 2/3 full. I would test for mites right now. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. I would feed 1 to 2 pollen patties each month. I would feed complete or apis biologics, like I talked about earlier, and then I would equalize brood between hives if needed. And so that's kind of what I'm doing over the course of the summer in a nutshell. So if you've made it this far and you don't have time to finish the video, take a picture of this, and this is what you need to focus on this summer. Now, what is the leading cause of hive death? It's Varroa mites. And we typically see those levels peaking in July and August. It's the leading cause of winter death, and winter's in those air quotes because most people say, oh, I had bees in my hive all fall, and then winter got here and all the bees disappeared. 95% of the time, that's because Varroa mite levels got high and your hive dwindled over the fall and then finally died in the winter. The winter didn't kill it. The Varroa mite levels way back in the summer did. Keep in mind, visual inspection is virtually pointless. So you can't look at your hive and say, well, I don't see Varroa mites. I must not have them. You really can't see them. Here are the hive growth trends. And again, you can take a screenshot of this or a picture of this, but this is what this will tell you for each month of the year what your goal is as far as how many frames of bees or how many frames of bees you have in a hive, what needs work, and what is beyond saving. So this gray bar, if we look at July, your hive should be 12 to 13 frames covered in bees. In July, if they are 8 frames of bees or less, they need some work. If there are 2 to 3 frames of bees, typically beyond saving. Another chart to show you, this is the Varroa threat trend. So this is kind of the Varroa growth trend. So you can see it lags slightly behind the bee population trend, but you've got July and August and September. Those are your key months when those Varroa mite levels are peaking, and we've got to take action or that hive isn't going to survive. So it's all about, those trends are really important to make sure you treat during that July, August, September period. Keep in mind, you can't see these Varroa mites. We often see the picture on the far right where you've got this little Varroa mite perched on a bee's back. That's typically not where they're located. They're usually wedged up underneath the underside of the bee's stomach, like you see on the picture on the left. And even with that, they're often not causing the most damage on the adult bees. It's causing the most damage on the developing brood is where the damage is happening. And so you can't see that. It's underneath those capped brood cells that the worst of the damage is happening. For resources wise, to do testing on Varroa mites, you can use a sticky board or you can use an alcohol wash. Both of these QR codes will take you to videos about how to use sticky boards and how to use the alcohol wash. These are the two of the most common treatments, Apigard and Apivar. I recommend rotating the usage, so don't use one more than once a year and then switch and use the other one. These QR codes will take you to videos on those products as well. Just as a quick refresher, if you don't want to go and watch the video, this is how you use a sticky board. You're going to insert the sticky board underneath a screen bottom board or directly into the hive entrance. You don't want to inspect the hive more than 1 day before you install the sticky board. You let it sit for 24 hours, you pull it out, and then you count the Varroa mites on it. If you've got more than 9 mites in the spring, you need to do a treatment. If you've got more than 11 mites in the summer, you need to do a treatment. An alcohol wash, Again, this QR code will take you to how to do an alcohol wash, but they are by far the most reliable form of Varroa mite testing. I usually test every 1 to 2 months, March through November. If you do this alcohol wash and you get more than 2 mites per 100 bees, you need to take action. And again, these are some instructions. I'll let you read through them, but I'd really recommend that you follow that QR code, watch the video, and it'll coach you through how to do that alcohol wash. And then, of course, always test after your treatment is done so that you can make sure that it actually worked. Now, for those of you that don't want to use a chemical option, I totally get it. I don't like using it either and try not to. You've got chemical options, mechanical or chemical-free options. You can use genetics. You can use an integrated pest management approach to all of these options. Keep in mind, if you're a brand new beekeeper, I typically recommend you use a chemical option until you really understand bees and beekeeping, and then you can go more natural if you want to. Because you've got to be really realistic with yourself. You've got to know the pros and cons of each method, but keep in mind that no treatment isn't an option. Your bees are going to die if you don't do something. There's varying classes of chemicals ranging from synthetic to natural. Natural doesn't always mean better for the bees or safe for you. Some of the more natural, an example would be, oxalic acid. And a common way to treat with oxalic acid is vaporizing it in a vaporizer. It works decently well as long as you don't have a lot of brood in the hive, but you're literally vaporizing an acid. So even though it's a natural acid, it can be very dangerous. So all in all, if you're a first-year beekeeper, second-year beekeeper, use something like Apiguard and Apivar that typically just works well every time, especially if you rotate it. And then once you know more about bees and beekeeping over time, then you can branch out into other options. What a lot of people do is they do all of these things. You start with great genetics, something like our Texas 5000s. We have great genetics when it comes to being Varroa mite resistant, or really being more hygienic is a better way to say it. And then you can have mechanical options, like you can use a screen bottom board, etc. But those two things are typically not enough to not have to worry about Varroa mites. So you might then use an organic chemical or an organic option. And then, maybe once a year you use a conventional pesticide like the Apivar or Amitraz. We do have a class. Oops, sorry, jumping around there. We do have a class. If this is really confusing what I just covered is a drop in the bucket. And so I would really recommend you take our class. It's a couple hours where I kind of walk through all the different options, all the treatment options, natural, organic, mechanical, treatment-free. And once you finish that class, you should have a much better understanding of, how to handle Varroa mites. And so I'd really, really recommend taking that class. A couple other quick things let's touch on before we wrap it up is adding boxes during the summer. If you've harvested your honey, well, you should stop adding honey supers when you're within about a week of the honey flow ending. If you want to know how to tell when the honey flow ends, go back and watch the June webinar, or go to our YouTube channel and look at our June videos. And I had a whole video on how to tell when the honey flow starts and stops. But usually within about a week of the honey flow coming to an end, I'm not going to add honey supers anymore. If you're going into the summer and your hive is still just one deep box, then I'd really recommend that you add another box, because they need at least 2 boxes to help keep cool. If both of your brood boxes are full this time of year, I would add a third box, and it can be foundation, it can be drawn out comb, just to give them a heat barrier between that hot sun beating down on the top of the lid and where they're raising the brood. Another really important thing to pay attention to this time of year is nutrition. When you're going into a summer dearth, you're often running into nutrition problems because all the flowers are dying. The bees aren't bringing in much pollen. They're not bringing in a lot of nectar. And so learning your local forage is really important. What is blooming during the summer? What is a great pollen source during the summer? Is it blooming or is it all dead this year? And that's where talking to local beekeepers can be really helpful, because they can really help you understand what to look for in the summer to know how bad your dearth is. Keep in mind, these are the things that bees need to grow and thrive. They need protein, which is pollen. They need a variety of pollen, not just one kind. They need carbs, which is nectar and syrup. They need to be largely free of mites, under 2 per 100 bees, largely free of brood disease. That complete and Apis biologics can help with that. And they need a healthy, vibrant queen. That's what you need to keep bees healthy. And you typically see this in the summer. The picture on the right is what you see in the spring. These whole frames full of beautiful pollen. The left is more what we see in the summer. You've got brood and then you've got some pollen kind of patched around it. And that's normal because the bees aren't bringing in as much resources. And so what a lot of us do is we feed more, right? We're feeding pollen substitute, which is good, and then we're feeding a lot of syrup. And we have to really balance syrup feeding, especially because if you feed too much, this is what your brood nest can start looking like, where you've got just a little patch of brood in the middle, and then you've got all this stored honey or syrup around the edge, and there's nowhere for the queen to lay. So that's why I really recommend trickle feeding instead of giving your bees, 2 gallons of syrup a week. I like to give them a trickle of food over the summer. So I feed them about 2 1-pound pollen patties per month on a strong, healthy hive. I want to make sure they can eat it in about a week. That's one of the things I love about the global pollen patties. The bees eat them really quickly, which means small hive beetles can't get a foothold in them. And then on the sugar syrup, I'm feeding 1/4 to 1/2 a gallon per week until the hive has 30 pounds of stored honey or syrup in their second brood box. And at that point, I'm going to stop feeding for the most part. I might feed them a sugar brick to keep them going, but I'm going to start reducing the syrup feeding once I get to that 30 pounds in the second box. Pollen patties, it's great insurance. A lot of people are skeptical. Do I really need pollen substitute? I always say try it on 1 or 2 hives and then don't try it on 1 or 2 hives and then compare. Next spring, see which ones are healthier. 9 times out of 10, the ones you gave pollen patties end up being healthier. But it's relatively inexpensive. It's cheap insurance. I like to feed a minimum of 2 patties per month, 2 months prior to when temperatures are in the 50s during the day. So I like to make sure they get at least 4 pounds in the fall per hive. That's what I do with my bees. They get 4 to 5 pounds in the couple months leading up to winter. So, August and September, I'm giving a couple pollen patties each month. It's not going to hurt them if you do a couple each month, July, August, September, October. I mean, it's going to be better for them if you give them more pollen substitute. So these are my overarching goals behind feeding syrup and pollen substitute. I want to ensure my bees never run out of resources so they can continue rearing brood. I want to ensure their immune system stays healthy. If they are running out of resources, their immune systems dip, and I don't want that. I want to ensure proper winter stores. I want to make sure they have enough food going into winter. And we've got to make sure that happens in September. They need all the stores done by September, or late September if you're in the South, because once you start getting cold fronts and we get days in the 50s, the bees aren't really storing food anymore. So we've got to be thinking about that now. And then in some cases, you can feed over the summer to encourage extra comb or brood production. One thing is if your hive has all of the stored syrup that they need, and if you're already at, hey, I've got about 30 to 40 pounds in my second brood box already, feeding stand soft sugar bricks can be a great option for giving them a small trickle of food over the summer without them becoming honey bound. So keeping a sugar brick on there through the summer and through the fall is a fantastic option as well. And then if you need to boost the strength of a hive, so if you've got a hive that doesn't have a lot of brood or is struggling a little bit, the global pollen patty with complete in it, or using this complete mixed in with syrup, can really help boost the brood. A lot of people feed this during the summer dearth to encourage comb production, or if they want to do summer splits, they're feeding complete to the hive before they make the split and then after they make the split, just to really boost up that brood population. Last thing to mention is keeping hives cool, and Chari talked about this a little bit, but screen bottom boards are helpful. Shade is helpful. Cracking the lid open a little bit is helpful. My favorite thing to do is really just to add an extra box on top. This upper picture on the upper right is just adding an extra box up on top, and that just gives them this dead air space so that they can stay a little bit cooler. Some people get pool umbrellas and they'll stick a pool umbrella over the hive. And that actually works pretty well too. It just gives them shade during the summer months, and then you can remove it when winter comes along. Oh, wasn't the last slide, sorry. Robbing. Robbing is another big issue in the summer months, especially when you have a lot of dearth going on. There's nothing else for the bees to eat, so they get really robby. My biggest solution to that is I will only feed my bees in the late evening. So the bees have all night to clean up any drops or drips of syrup and get rid of that smell. And then you want to ensure equipment is tight fitting. And if you get into a robbing issue like this, you can use pine sol to spray on the seams or the cracks of the hive, and it immediately shuts the robbing impulse down for the bees. Chari mentioned this, and I mentioned this earlier, but you want to make sure you take care of your supers after you harvest honey from them. So you can put them in a freezer if you've got a ton of freezer space. If you don't, you can put them in the freezer and then put them in that super bag like I talked about. Or you can just put them straight into the super bag and put wax moth crystals in every 6 weeks or so. We've got a couple videos on our YouTube channel too. If you just go to our YouTube channel and just search wax moth, then you'll see the videos on how to store honeycomb after the harvest. And we've got a video too. If you go to our YouTube channel and search Certan, Certan, we've got a video showing how to treat with Certan that Chari was talking about as well. So with that, I will see you in August. And we're going to be talking a lot about getting through the summer dearth again. What do we need to be doing to get through the heat? And then we'll talk a lot about prepping our bees for winter, because August is one of the final months where we can really affect change in our hives in order to make sure they're healthy and strong going into winter. So till then, you can always reach out, ask questions, comment, and we'll be happy to answer questions on this YouTube video. And I will see you in August. Have a great July, everybody.